What's going on, everybody? It is that time again. The Sooners Illustrated Podcast, episode 114 on this Thursday, September 26th, 2024. Josh Callaway, Collin Kennedy with you on a Thursday. Loaded recruiting show and team news show. Loaded show in general on a Thursday. Coming out of the Tennessee game, full recruiting reaction. We got our guy here, Collin Kennedy. We'll dive into all of it. What are some things he's hearing? Good, bad. We'll get into it all. Kamori Moore decommitting. We'll talk about that. Where does Oklahoma go next on defensive line? We'll also have an update on star-studded 2025 offensive tackle Andrew Babalola. And a lot of team news as well. Michael Hawkins, QB1, Jacobe Johnson making a position change. So we got a lot to get to. Loaded Thursday show, like I said. And we'll have James E. Jackson on at the end of the show as well, hit on some in-state recruiting stuff. So we have a lot to get to. We won't delay any further. CK, we talked about it going into the weekend. It was a stacked recruiting visit list for that Tennessee game. A who's who. I can speak to it. The sidelines were as packed as any game as I've ever been to at Owen Field. What's some of the reaction coming out of it? And we talked about this before after the Houston game where, I kind of asked you, how much does the product on the field really matter? And again, the defensive product was great, but offensively it was kind of hard to watch again on Saturday, as well documented. But the atmosphere was phenomenal. It was a competitive game, a lot of hoopla. What's kind of the reception that you've kind of gathered in general coming out of what was obviously a really big recruiting weekend for Oklahoma with a lot of guys in town?
Oklahoma fans, tip of the cap to you.
Yeah.
You did your thing, and it was recognized by some of the best in the country on the recruiting trail. I tweeted it out during the game. I thought it was really cool. Holly Rowe took some time to mention during the game broadcast. Oklahoma's fan base made it the loudest game atmosphere that ABC primetime crew had over the past 2 years. I believe 2 decibel points louder than their trip to LSU last year. Reached 117 at its peak, and that stuff pays off because those prospects in the stands, Josh, they are raving about the experience, even like you mentioned, despite a relatively disappointing loss. But it all kind of combines. Number one, the fan base did their thing. And it was not just the fact that it was loud. A lot of recruits talked about how welcoming the fan base is, how much they enjoyed getting to know some of the members of the fan base. It was also kind of cool for them to sort of see how these people interact with each other and how obviously the game experience is portrayed. And so they thought that was really cool. I do think that it was awesome as well, the job that Oklahoma's off-field staffers did with this recruiting weekend. It was put to me by one of the recruits. You could tell that this just wasn't any normal game day weekend. From a literal red carpet rolled out to these recruits when they got on campus, got to strut the red carpet a little bit, to a dressed up dining hall experience for a pregame meal and allowing recruits and their families to hang around, some of the off-field staffers at Oklahoma, other recruits. It was all really cool. Guys had a great time. I was told about some pretty cool moments. One of them being, I heard that 5-star offensive tackle commit Michael Fasusi was like going out of his way to meet fans while he was on campus and talk to them about what he's going to do in OU's offense. And then I guess all the offensive line commits were together, hanging out, having a great time, talking about what they were going to do to help Oklahoma on the offensive side of the ball. And the one guy that couldn't make it apparently was Darius Alfalava, Oklahoma's guard commit out in the state of Utah. He had homecoming, Josh, and apparently, from what I was told, he got a FaceTime call during homecoming from all of OU's offensive line commits while he was getting ready for HoCo and they were getting ready to go to the game. So yeah, that kind of stuff you can't take for granted. In general, a lot of ground, I believe, covered with this weekend. Recruits openly admit right now that they see some of the struggles that are going on the offensive side of the ball, but a lot of them kind of phrase it in a way to where they believe that they can help this program. They see why this program is what it is from a reputation standpoint. I mean, that game day atmosphere, as you can attest, was incredible, but it also kind of hinted at what Oklahoma football is. And then everyone is talking about this defense. A lot of these young players are very excited about what OU is doing on that side of the ball. It's a system that players want to play in. I mean, It's a versatile unit. It's a system that intrigues a lot of guys, and it highlights players' strengths. And that's what you're looking for if you're a high-level defensive recruit. So, in general, really successful weekend. And what a lot of fans probably see as rightful negatives, I actually do think that that's somewhat of a positive draw when we're talking about some of these recruits evaluating OU as a potential destination.
Right. And, it makes sense because, like you said, it was an awesome atmosphere and the game was competitive. Obviously offensively, it was ugly at times. A lot of it, before Michael Hawkins kind of did some things late, but you could see why anybody in town for that could leave, feeling good about the direction. And some guys, you never know. I mean, you look at it and you say, you kind of mentioned it, I can help, as opposed to, it's all about a mindset, and it's going to vary from guy to guy, but definitely a big weekend for Oklahoma. It sounds like it went really well. As far as some other recruiting things, so we talked, however long, a couple weeks ago about Floyd Boucard decommitting on his defensive line. Had another one yesterday with Kamori Moore, 2025 3-star defensive line up there from Lee Summit North in Missouri. So he announced decommitment. You've put some extra context to this for our VIP members over at Sooners Illustrated. So if you're a VIP member, you kind of have a better idea of what exactly the situation here. For you, I guess, your reaction to what this actually means. And then if you want to kind of spin it toward, now you've had 2 defensive line guys you had in the bag here with Boucard and Moore that are no longer in your class.
Sure.
Where does Oklahoma try to go? Are they going to be aggressive and try to add more defensive linemen in 2025? Or just kind of, I guess, put a bow and kind of context on it all right now for where Oklahoma is defensive line-wise in 2025?
Yeah, I think they have to get aggressive right now. More on that in a second. I know a lot of folks will be curious about what happened here with Kamori Moore. The best way that I can phrase it is I think this was something that both parties saw coming and expected. That's Kamori Moore. That is Oklahoma as well. And so everyone involved kind of knew this was going to be a thing.
Sure.
And that's probably the fullest extent I can go into the situation. I know some may be curious what's next for Kamori Moore. Our Tom Lloyd put up a report late last night. Sounds like Nebraska and Iowa State have a chance to get in the mix with him. I believe he was just at Iowa State the other weekend, and Nebraska hired Jamar Mosey for an off-field role, if I remember correctly. So his old head coach at Lee Summit North, now a connection to the Huskers and what obviously Nebraska is doing under Matt Rule. Really good stuff. So that's the Kamori Moore side of the equation for Oklahoma. I do think they have to be relatively aggressive. Yes, they kind of knew that Kamori Moore was eventually going to be exiting the class at some point. So I do think that they've started to sort of reset the board to a degree. But the other part of that too is, well, they're probably feeling still relatively confident, even though Kamori Moore is no longer part of this class, still feel like, for me personally, Floyd Boucard was a tough loss. I mean, I think that guy's got a lot of ability. And now you're down 2 defensive tackles at a spot where you prefer to add a good amount of depth. Now, I'll have more for our subscribers on this, so go ahead and join us on Sooners Illustrated if you haven't already. But Alan True and I, one of our national recruiting analysts at 24/7 Sports, we had heard about this Kamori Moore thing a couple of weeks ago, it being a possibility and something that we would probably have to monitor. And so over the last couple of weeks, I've been touching base with some 2025 defensive tackles behind the scenes, just kind of getting a lay of the land. And so I'll have a few names on the board for our subscribers. But the long and short of it is, I think Oklahoma right now is not jumping to any conclusions. They're not over pursuing. And I think that's important because you want to get this stuff right. Those defensive tackle takes they're significant. I mean, those are scholarships you don't really want to waste on a player that you don't necessarily can think that they can contribute for you, right? So Oklahoma's doing its due diligence at defensive tackle in 2025. I don't think a ton of movement or traction has actually taken place, but I think that's part of the plan. And because of that, I would expect Oklahoma to start moving on a few offers or even a potential flip candidate or two in the coming months.
Yeah, right now I would think that it puts a lot of eggs in the, Trent Wilson basket, which is
Yeah.
not a bad basket to put eggs into. Certainly, we talked about everything that's expected of him, but obviously you have Shield Knight and CJ Nixon, the big headliner on the edges. But like you said, deep tackle is now you got one guy in 2025. That's a position that you want to build up, like you talked about a bunch of times, and your team just stack class after class after class. Now you're a little thin suddenly, and we'll see if they
Yeah.
can make some late movement here, like you said, flip candidates, things like that. We'll see.
I do want to remind folks too why I believe they have to be relatively aggressive. And you and I have talked about this here on the show. I just feel like it's such an important reminder why this is more than just you're losing defensive tackle commits. In today's era, defensive tackles are definitely at their cheapest, for lack of a better term, when they're recruits.
Yeah.
Yes, I could sit here and tell the fan base that, well, Oklahoma could probably just go in the transfer portal and get another Dominic Williams or DeJohn Terry.
Sure.
And that's all fair and well. But the bottom line is you'd rather have them as recruits because you can not only develop them in your program, you're not having to break the bank. Transfer portal defensive tackles, I don't know how many times we've documented it. It's tough. It's tough to get a guy, especially at the level of what we're seeing right now in guys like Dominic Williams or DeJohn Terry. So definitely have to be aggressive from that standpoint as well. You don't want to be in a situation where your hands are tied whenever the portal window opens up. You'd much rather go get these guys as high school recruits.
100%. Staying on the line of scrimmage, but flipping over from defense to offense. We've talked about five-star offensive tackle Andrew Babalola a handful of times on the program. Obviously, very highly coveted player. Top-end offensive tackle. I mean, 5-star, all that stuff. Let's get a little update on him. I know you've mentioned that you got some really cool stuff coming from 24/7 Sports, using a lot of our vast network of recruiting insiders that's going to allow fans of various teams to have a better sense of where things kind of are with him. But for you, I guess, preview that a little bit, but then also just kind of a little temperature check on him as a name that we've talked about before, as kind of, I guess, where things kind of sitting with him from your perspective as of now, as we get, close to October here in 2025.
Yeah, more VIP content for our subscribers. This morning, we did a 24/7 Sports expert roundtable of sorts, featuring a number of our reporters and writers. It's myself, Christian Clemente at our Auburn site, national recruiting analyst Tom Loy and Alan True, Bryce Marriage from our Michigan site. I mean, the list goes on and on. We have a number of members of our team site network and national team just publishing essentially our various opinions and perspective on this 5-star offensive tackle. Now, why we're bringing this up, it's kind of appropriate timing because Oklahoma and Auburn, getting ready to play each other this weekend, are two of the top 5 teams for Babalola himself.
Sure.
There's also, on top of that expert roundtable, if you will, regarding Babalola's recruitment, an update that I just put together. Our Ryan Wallace, one of my guys, he reports on Kansas State for us at gopowercat.com. Go check him out. He also does a recruiting podcast for the Kansas City Sports Network out there in KC. And so him and Kevin Flaherty, another great friend, they actually went out and talked to Andrew Babalola himself to get an update on everything from his top 5 schools, his perspective of them, to where he's at in the process, maybe a decision timeline, things of that nature.
Right.
So the takeaways as it relates to Oklahoma and Babalola, number one, it's relatively clear to me that OU's still somewhat in this thing. I mean, he has talked about a number of times that of the utmost importance in his process is development on and off the field. Academics are way up there. I believe he wants to go either into the medical field or some sort of engineering field. This guy's, I mean, super smart. Stanford's in there in the top 5 for a reason, folks. But he talked a lot about Bill Bedenbaugh, his relationship. He basically said, Oklahoma's in my top 5 because of the development I could have from a coach like Bill Bedenbaugh. So Bill be doing his typical thing, but then Babalola talked a lot about his perspective on Brent Venables and his perception of OU's program, its foundations. Essentially, OU checks a lot of boxes. But some of the key updates that we got, there is a new timeline in his mind. Now, I don't really want to put that in the public sphere yet because he's now changed his decision timeline twice, 3 times. So we'll see if it sticks. But then the other newsworthy aspect of this, Josh, is he's essentially told everyone in his top 5 he is not going to take any more game day visits until he makes his decision. So it felt like Auburn, Oklahoma was prime visit territory for this guy.
Sure.
For those who don't know, Babalola actually has a brother who lives in the state of Alabama. And so Auburn has location advantage relative to some family ties. There was some thought that maybe Babalola would go down, see some family, evaluate Auburn as a potential destination, and evaluate Oklahoma at the same time. He does not plan to do that. In fact, he has said, I eventually am going to come to a decision, and then I will immediately visit the school that I choose after that final call. So we'll see. It's really interesting. At the end of the day, man, this is an elite 5-star offensive tackle with an athletic profile that you just don't see. So he can take all the time he wants and needs. Oklahoma continues to chip away. I think my perspective right now, I still feel other programs are in better contention, but who knows? I mean, we've seen the Sooners pull off some crazier stuff. So OU remains in the mix. Unfortunately, he will not be at their game this weekend, but a big name remains out there for the Sooners in 2025.
Definitely interesting. And, you would think, and that's a scary thing to do with high school kids, but you would think that not taking any more visits would suggest getting close. I don't see, if you're going to sign early, that's coming up. So like I said, it's almost October. So interesting stuff. We'll keep up. I can't help but notice. And it sounds like it's the same thing with all these top end offensive line recruits. The development under Bill Bedenbaugh that comes up every time. These guys aren't dumb. They see how many guys in the pros that Bill Bedenbaugh has put there. And Oklahoma is very strategic in that too. The graphics of what they're all making, guys that coach Bill Bedenbaugh, things like that. And that's just another one. And so, I know the offensive line this season is not where it wants to be. So Bill Bedenbaugh's caught some flack. Patience. It's coming. It's coming big time. As far as the current team, got some big things going on this week. Obviously, first road trip's coming up with Auburn. I want to get your thoughts on the game here in just a little bit. But first, Monday on the podcast, Tom, James, and myself, obviously we got into the play of Jackson Earl getting benched against Tennessee. And we kind of talked about who's going to start at quarterback against Auburn. At the time, I won't speak for them, but I fully expected that we were going to get to Saturday without an announced starter. And it was going to be watching warm-ups and seeing who trots out there for the first drive. Brent Venables did none of that. Monday night, coach's show, boom, Michael Hawkins Jr. is going to start at quarterback on Saturday. He talked about his decision a little bit more in the press conference on Tuesday. It's on the YouTube channel if you want to go check it out if you missed it. Basically, end of the day, Jackson Earl making too many big mistakes, too many turnovers, Michael Hawkins taking over. Your reaction here, this felt like the only move, right? Are you in agreement there? I mean, you kind of had to with what he did late in the second half. He probably earned this start, but I was a little surprised that he came right out and just announced it on Monday like that. And we'll see what happens on Saturday. First start on the road as a true freshman. Go get him, kid. We'll see what happens. It's going to be fun.
I think it's the right move. I think what Mike showed towards the back end of that game against Tennessee earned him the right to have this opportunity. Now, we can go into everything that comes with this. I'll leave that to the game preview pod. I'm going to try to come at this angle from a recruiting perspective.
Sure.
Now that he's tabbed the starter, what should Oklahoma fans really expect? Went back and watched the tape of his senior year at Frisco Emerson. Went back and watched the tape of him playing against Tennessee. I'm going to start with the mental makeup or the player himself. Obviously, this is a young man who has been raised in football. Dad played in the NFL and college. He's been around the game for years, has been a high-profile recruit. since he was very young. And you saw this kind of come to fruition whenever he stepped into the game, Josh. He is as calm, cool, and collected as it gets. When I first met him, I believe when he was a freshman or sophomore, very quiet, cool, didn't say too much, but what he said, you really wanted to listen to.
Mm-hmm.
He was that kind of quarterback that he's going to command the room when it's time to go. Not the biggest guy in the world, not the most toolsy, but man, he knows how to operate an offense and capitalize on even some unit deficiencies. So that gets into the player. Number one, I don't have to sit here and talk much about the speed that he has, what he's capable of with his legs. I was watching his tape senior year at Emerson as I was taking a walk, and I had to stop walking just to see how fast he's going, because the straight line speed as a quarterback is rare. I mean, when this guy takes off, it's go time. You better be ready to get him at the second level. Or he's gone in an instant. What I think a lot of people will be curious about is the quarterback side of this equation, for lack of a better term. I think Michael Hawkins has a chance to be a really good quarterback for this system. Why I say that? At Emerson specifically, a lot of vertical concepts were ran with Hawkins at signal caller. So he's no stranger to touch throws, spot throws, pushing the ball downfield with a little bit of velocity. And I think you saw that with that beautiful throw down to the left side, the Oklahoma sideline, to Jaquez Petaway, if I remember correctly. It was a dime. What I think will ultimately be the key for Michael Hawkins is executing the short to intermediate route concepts that are based on timing, windows, making sure you're getting the ball in there at the right time. Because I think the beauty of Michael Hawkins is you trust this guy fully. If it's a one-on-one matchup, even down the field, I mean, he's a power 4 quarterback for a reason. He's probably going to be able to get you an explosive play if given the opportunity somewhere down the way. Number one, timing, execution, getting that ball in. And number two, I think what I kind of want to include as well, and when we get to the game, what I'm afraid of, and this isn't even Michael Hawkins related, what I'm afraid of, Josh, is that going into this game, everyone's expecting Michael Hawkins to fix everything.
Sure.
When in reality, as we all know, that just doesn't.
Right.
That doesn't happen tomorrow. I think the beauty of this is he's going to be able to elevate the unit, at least on paper, because of his ability to operate under pressure. I think he has some really encouraging stuff when it comes to navigating things off script. And I think that's something Jackson Arnold struggled with at times to the start of the year. And then you obviously trust him to use his legs to bail out the offensive line.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the day, what I hope is that this offense gives Michael Hawkins a fair shot, because I don't think that's always been the case with Jackson Arnold. And I think while Mike was able to do some things himself over the course of 4 quarters as a true freshman in one of the most storied road environments there is in college football.
Right.
It will ultimately come down to, in my opinion, Michael Hawkins getting a fair shot. As long as he has a fair shot, man, I think this guy's got a chance to be a really good quarterback for Oklahoma, and he has a chance to completely change the perspective that we have on this season. And if that comes to fruition, we're talking about a totally different football team with Michael Hawkins leading the way.
It's just such a fascinating path, to this point, because, he committed to Oklahoma April 2023. Not that highly touted a prospect, not big prospect. There's a lot of negatives in there. Had offers from lots of notable places, but he, compared to Jackson Arnold, who was, a 5-star prospect when all said and done, depending on who you asked, maybe the top quarterback in the class, depending on, again, just whose opinion, Gatorade National Player of the Year, things like that. committed to Oklahoma. He's an OU legacy. Like you said, his dad played there. And he just put together a monster senior season by all accounts. I never saw him, but going from guys like you who did get to see him in person down there, in the DFW, McKinney, Texas. And then, we talked about it a couple times during spring and during fall camp. Just came in and balled throughout camp. And Jackson Arnold did not. And it, that noise kind of got a little bit loud from outside that, hey, Michael Hawkins is out playing him. And he did in camp. But it was always Arnold's job, and Arnold had earned that. And there was no reason to doubt that it wouldn't improve as the season went on. It just kind of never did for Jackson. And the mistakes just kind of piled up too high to the point that Brent Venables wanted to make the move. And he's sticking with it. And it's a big move, too. I mean, if it doesn't work, you're putting a lot of risk if you're Brent Venables because, it could really blow up in your face. Or it could be the move that is talked about for a long time, having the guts to make the move, to sit the 5-star down and to go with the kid who's like your gut feel. It's fascinating. It's really exciting to see how it plays out. I think, you had to give it a shot. I agree with starting him, so I'm not disagreeing at all with any of that. It's just, it's a big move. It's a big move. So I'm excited to see it. It's a tough place to start on the road against a solid defense. When your offensive line has not been great and you have no run game and all your receivers are hurt. I mean, it's not an advantageous spot to start for your first career start, but it's really exciting. I think the right move. And I felt like Oklahoma, this is what they need to do. So I'm excited to see how it looks on Saturday. It's going to be interesting, to say the least. Very excited.
Well, speaking of receivers, Josh.
Speaking of receivers, they added one this week. Jacobe Johnson's moving from corner to receiver. Now, this is funny because this is like one of those like fan things. like you're just talking with your buddies trying to figure out what can they do. You just throw this out there. Jacobe Johnson played receiver in high school. Maybe move him over. He's a big body guy. And they're actually doing it. So Oklahoma's moving Jacobe Johnson over from cornerback to receiver. This is not unprecedented. It happens. Not the same situation at all as DJ Graham. Brent Venables was very quick to point that out because a lot of people make that connection. Oh, DJ Graham did this. DJ Graham chose to do that. He came to Oklahoma and said, I want to move. I like offense. I want to move over. This was a necessity thing, and Oklahoma came to Jacobe to make the move. So it's a different situation. Obviously, the guy played in high school, played both ways at Mustang, right down the road here in Oklahoma City. I saw him. He was a beast, okay? Really good player in high school football in Oklahoma. Does that mean he's going to go ball out in the SEC? I don't know. We'll find out in due time. Mm-hmm. What do you make of the move? Obviously, you followed his recruitment, I'm sure. And when he landed with Oklahoma, he was a really big-time athlete. Also, was a big-time basketball recruit. Remember, he had an offer to play hoops from Porter Moser at OU. This guy can do a lot for you. He's a mature, mature kid and all that good stuff. He's going to work at it. Brent Venables made sure to kind of put a little damper on the expectations for this week. In 1 week, having a big impact probably is asking a bit much. But he did envision by the end of the season that he will have a role and he'll be a factor here. What do you make of it? And what do you think from just scouting Jacobe and watching him play over the last few years, go back to high school? Can he do this? Can he step in and be a big impact guy on offense this season?
Message boards matter, folks. Message boards win.
It's so funny.
What you do matters, subscribers. I mean, you help the coaching staff make a huge decision. Don't let anyone tell you differently. For the same reasons that Jacobe Johnson has a chance to be really, really good on the defensive side of the ball long term, those same reasons give him a shot to be an immediate contributor on the offensive side of the ball in the short term.
Sure.
Height, weight, speed, athletic ability, instincts. It's a pretty good 5 to have, right? It checks a lot of boxes. When Jacobe was coming up, I worked closely with Gabe Brooks, one of our national scouting team analysts, on Jacobe Johnson. We really wanted to try and get this evaluation right. He was a tricky one to kind of nail down. But what excited us most and what I'm interested in, part of the scouting report on Jacobe is coverage awareness and recognition. which not only feeds into his ability to play within coverage concepts, but attack coverage concepts. And then he's a very natural, instinctual football player. And this is probably going to be a guy who understands where to sit in the zone. He's going to understand, all right, I got to stack and get out of this defensive back's way.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to have a very natural understanding of how to play the position because he did it in high school at an elite level. And obviously Brent mentioned that during the press conference. On top of that, though, this is someone who, 6'2", well into the 200s. Part of me getting ready for this podcast was like, am I going to sit on the show and just talk about what I watched on tape and just start shouting the way that I did on Monday? But there is a play, and you and I talked about this on the phone the other day, Josh. There's a play in the Tennessee game tape where Oklahoma calls a wide receiver screen to the far side, and every single receiver on that side of the field for the screen action is 5'10" or less. I mean, they need a body. They need a big, capable body. And Jacobe Johnson's the definition of that, right? Big, capable, athletic body type. And it just so matter of fact happens to help that this guy was an elite dual sport athlete, one of the best two-sport athletes in the country, has an incredible frame, and just one of the more gifted athletes the state of Oklahoma had in a really long time. So I love this decision. I think you mentioned the DJ Graham stuff. It almost kind of, to me, felt more like, if you'll remember when Jaqualine Crawford several years ago had to move from wide receiver to defensive back. If I remember correctly, it was a more out of a necessity deal, and Jaqualine Crawford at the time was just like, I'll do whatever I can to help the team. I mean, I'm not expecting Jacobe Johnson to become an All-American wide receiver, 1,000 yards through the air, but kind of like what Jaqualine Crawford provided at the time in a moment of need, this guy's going to be able, a couple weeks in, especially with a bye week coming up, I think this guy has a real chance to step in and help out Oklahoma on that side of the ball.
I agree. I mean, obviously, we'll see where Deion Burks is this week. Bliss is questionable on the first availability report on Wednesday night, which is supposed to be 50-50. I think it leans toward he'll play, but we'll see. But after that, I mean, everyone's hurt. We talked about it many times. It's all young guys. It's all freshmen. I mean, it's the two Zions, Kearney and Raggins. It's Ivan Carrion. It's KJ Daniels, who we haven't seen at all. And then Jacquez Petaway. So, I mean, they need another guy. And not that Jacoby's an old guy. He's not. He's also in year 2. But at least having somebody who's been around and had, some time to strength and conditioning, stuff like that is nice just in and of itself, because it is a wildly young position right now with all the injuries. Mm-hmm. So we'll see. It's exciting move. It is funny because like I said, it's one of those things that just like an OU blogger will just like throw out there, and they're actually doing it. Kind of dig it. Jaron Kanik to running back? Is that next? Maybe that's next.
I believe the popular take there is Jaron Kanik to H-back tight end.
Yes.
Which maybe that's next, because Lord knows they need him. They need something.
Why not? If this works, all of a sudden you're like, what else can we do?
At the end of the day, man, the common theme is everything's on the table for the offense.
Yeah.
Everything is on the table. And that's just how it has to be.
100%. All right. All that in mind, I do want to get your thoughts before we let you go on the game. So Oklahoma's going on the road for the first time this weekend. They are a slight favorite going to Auburn. Obviously, Auburn's not been great. We'll get into more in the game preview. They're 2-2. They've played 2 Power 5 teams and lost them both at home to Cal and Arkansas. But they got players, and they have a good offensive coach in Hugh Freeze. We'll get into it. Like I said, I don't want to just everything I'm going to say on the game preview. But for you, what are you going to be watching for in this game, and how do you think it goes? I mean, this is a big moment for OU. If you win this game, you feel like you're kind of back on track. You lose this game, you're like, oh, God, this could snowball. This is a big game.
It's a must-win, in my opinion. I mean, I don't think there's any way to phrase it other than the fact that they have to find a way to win this game. No holds barred. It's one of the most difficult environments in college football. We know that Jordan-Hare, weird stuff goes down. I mean, I don't know how many of best moments in college football
I know.
Jordan Harris featured in. It's quite a few, but man, there's so many different ways you could go. Number one, over under 3.5 quarterbacks playing in this game. I mean, it's a question. It's a question. I want to see how this plays out, obviously, at the signal caller spot for both teams. But at the end of the day, I think the more intriguing elements to this, who's playing on the offensive line for Oklahoma this week? Who's got it? I mean,
Jake Taylor is probable as of now.
Yeah.
Troy Everett's not on the list at all, so that would suggest that he's completely healthy. So
exactly my point. You have a guy on paper who's a starting caliber offensive tackle, potentially ready to play for you. But the last time he tried, it didn't go well. I mean, and not from a standpoint, he was falling apart physically a little bit.
Right.
Troy Everett, you and I talked on the phone preparing for the pod. I think there's someone that you got to find a way to get in at guard. I mean, just get him on the field. The bottom line, Oklahoma's interior offensive line right now needs help. They need help. And I think Troy Everett can provide that. I think this offensive line faces a huge test because while Tennessee is just a bunch of bad MFers, Auburn's got a lot of different stuff that they can bring to the table. We know that Oklahoma has struggled significantly from a communication and awareness standpoint, execution perspective on the offensive line. If you need proof, just go watch the safety from last weekend.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the line of scrimmage again in this one is huge, the quarterback position. But then in general, as long as Michael Hawkins doesn't make the big mistake, as long as his decision-making is up to par, I think Oklahoma's got a real chance to go and win this football game. I think OU is the better football team on paper. And while it's a really tough test on the road, as long as OU, in my opinion, just does some of the simple stuff well, they have a real opportunity to go get a must-win on the road in the SEC.
You going to take them? Score prediction, Oklahoma-Auburn. You going to roll with it?
I'm taking them. Give me Oklahoma. I believe the Sooners are a 2-point favorite. Most places you look.
Slight road favorite, yeah.
If you're wanting me to give a score prediction, give me 17-10. Let's go 17-10. Field position is kind of the sneaky thing, in my opinion. Yeah. I mean, on the road, the last thing you want to do is be struggling to move the ball. The crowd is on top of you. All of a sudden, that offense for Auburn that's struggling to move it at all, kind of like you, gets favorable field position. I mean, OU put itself at risk a couple of times in the Tennessee game. Vols capitalized at times. Sometimes they didn't. But you were at home. And now you're on the road. I think field position is a massive aspect of this game. And again, as long as Oklahoma focuses on things like field position or just some of the fundamentals and the execution aspect, I think OU comes out with a big win and goes into the bye week feeling a lot better about itself before that Texas game.
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, they put the defense in some tough spots against Tennessee. Turnover on midfield on the very first possession of the game. Obviously the literal turnovers. They got away with it for the most part. Defense continued to answer the bell. Not going to be able to do that all year. Definitely need to be a little more cognizant of that as the season goes on.
Yeah. And can I just say, Luke Elzinga might be your best player, man.
He's been balling.
He's a weapon.
He's been balling. He's been balling. I talked about it on Monday. I thought the first drive of the game around midfield, they should have just punted and try to pin him deep.
That's what I said on the board during the game. I was like, man, you got your home crowd. It's the best it's been in years. And your punter is like the guy.
Pin
him.
He's a beast.
Pin him. Yeah, man.
All right. I think we'll get James in here to do a little bit of in-state stuff. CK Pritchich as always. Hopefully I make it to Auburn. And we'll have a fun weekend here on the road for the first time. Then we'll enjoy a nice little bye week, and we'll get ready for Texas.
Yeah, everyone out there, be safe. I wish you all the best. Be careful out there. I know it's getting sticky weather-wise. But you were telling me the game day weather itself should be clear.
It looks great.
Yeah,
it looks great. It's kind of today, Thursday, and Friday that are like the worst of it. So hopefully if we can all get there, we'll be in good shape.
Enjoy the game. Really cool that Oklahoma's getting to go on the road in the SEC. Yeah. Enjoy that atmosphere, folks, but please be safe getting out there, and we appreciate you guys listening to the show.
Absolutely. All right, we'll go ahead and get James on the show, do a little bit of in-state stuff here to wrap up, and we'll be back next Monday for the next full show. But we got James coming on right now for some in-state recruiting stuff. All right, we now welcome on James D. Jackson to the program. James comes on the Thursday shows to do a little in-state recruiting talk. James, we talked about it last week going into the weekend, both with Collin and with you. Obviously, it was a huge visitor list coming into town for that Tennessee game. Got into that a little bit with Collin as far as some of the reaction coming out of it. But for you, I know you've been talking to some in-state guys. What are some of the things that you've heard as far as some of these in-state kids that were in town for Tennessee, some of the reactions coming out of that that you've been able to gather? As the crowd was obviously on fire. We were all there. What were some things that people were saying coming out of this thing? I learned lost. It was still obviously a heck of an atmosphere and a really cool weekend.
I learned a lot about how these recruits view stuff like this, because I was also curious, like when you go and view a team, does them winning and losing the game, how much does that affect what you're trying to do? And a lot of them said it's more about the relationships they have with the coaches, the atmosphere that's presented on the field, and then, just the competitive level of the team. And I think that was a big reason for a lot of them saying they really enjoyed their experience last Saturday. Just talking about that, because OU obviously had a very great crowd environment, the drone show, things like that. All of that was impactful. Right. It was very good first SEC game. I think that made a very good impression on a lot of guys. Now, I'm talking down a list of like Emerson Alaska, four-star running back Caden Jones, Mason James, Bryson Brown, Jacob Graves, like all those guys like were out there. It's something that you really like to see from those guys, because they're the best in the state. They're the best in the state for a reason from years to come. It's not just like the next class. It goes all the way down to 2027. Like there's guys that are viewing this from so far away. And I think they all really had a good time, and it showed the impact or what it could be like if they come to Oklahoma and play in the SEC and hopefully help them get to wins in that type of environment.
Yeah, Collin and I have talked about this before. I remember specifically after the Houston game, I kind of broached the subject of there's a lot of guys in town, but, obviously we all remember that was a very ugly game offensively.
Yeah.
But you're right. I think most guys kind of view it as they really just more like what the experience was like, what the crowd was like, things like that. They're not as concerned of the product on the field as I think the casual fan might think. Now, if the team goes 0-12 every year, I'm sure it'd be hard to get top end players. But I think just having a big time atmosphere, enjoying the visit, and I think that does more than necessarily like, oh, we lost the game, we're out of luck. That's the sentiment that I seem to get. And it sounds like it's the same story here. Yeah,
for sure. That would be a lot more difficult, because in Georgia and Alabama, those type of programs would be getting all the recruits. Now, OU has they have the pedigree of the resume that they've done over the past years to let people know, hey, we know how to win football games, so it's not like this one loss is the end all be all. So they can still hang their hat on that. But obviously it didn't necessarily hurt them for them to lose against Tennessee because of the relationships that these players have with the coaches. Like I heard a lot about Jay Valai, like in the way that he does things. Heard a lot about Emmett Jones and the way he does things.
Right.
They're really, really good with those players. And I think that plays a much bigger part in where they want to play. They want to play for the right coach. And as you see it, when a coach leaves, guys tend to leave with them, things like that. It's really about the coach at this point in time. And I think the players that were there understand that as well.
Right. 100%. It was a really cool weekend in Oklahoma. And just obviously Oklahoma State had a big game. There was lots of high school games. It just kind of felt like a big football weekend.
Yeah. And I'll point out too, because I also got this story on women's basketball. I know this is a football podcast, but 5-star guard Keely Parks was in town, and she had a very good time at this same game. She talked about it. She sat next to the softball players who had all their rings and their bling going out. She was like, man, that must be nice. So OU was really trying to make a good impression on her as well, because obviously she's one of the best, top 10 in the nation in guards and things like that. So you really want to impress her. And I think she had a very good visit as well. I wrote a story about that that's actually free on our website if you want to go check it out. It's a very good story. I think she gave a really good impression of what she saw. So it'd be good to check that one out.
No, it's a good point, because I think that it gets overlooked sometimes how much those big football game weekends can help the other sports.
Exactly.
They all bring you. If you pay attention on the sideline, Jenny Baranchek's down there, Jacobe Johnson's down there, Patty Yasso. They all have visitors that they take. It helps the other sports too. It's a good point. All right, I think that's it. We'll be back tomorrow morning, Friday, for the game preview. James, Tom, myself set the full stage for Oklahoma and Auburn. And then obviously we'll be there on Saturday afternoon for what should be a fun one, Oklahoma's first road trip in the SEC. So be sure to be tuned into all that. We'll have the next full show Monday, the Sooners Illustrated podcast with James, Tom, myself, to pull apart the Auburn game. And of course, dissect it all, whatever the heck happens in Michael Hawkins' first career start on Monday. That's it for now. Be sure to become a VIP member to Sooners Illustrated. Lots of great VIP content there and more to come. For Collin Kennedy earlier, James D. Jackson, I'm Josh Callaway. We'll see you guys next time right back here on the Sooners Illustrated podcast.
See you.